With me today is Gaetano Cipolla. Professor Cipolla is a professor of Italian, but he once worked at St. John's University and a host of other universities. He's with Arba Sicula, an organization I recommend everybody check out if you're interested in Sicily, Sicilian history, Sicilian culture, poetry, music. He has a whole array of material there that he's written, translated, edited, and other people have done that as well. And so it's right there for you to check out, and I'll have a link to it. But he's come to us today with a book that he has translated and edited, written by Giuseppe Sciano. The title of it is The Struggle for Sicilian Independence. And this is the book right here. Behind here, you might be able to see the author. He passed away, I think, 2 years ago, and he was an activist, political activist in Italy. His forte was Sicily, and he was trying to advocate for Sicilian independence. How far the independence remains a question. Will Sicily be its own country, its own autonomy? That remains a question. But the book here is about the Risorgimento and how the Risorgimento had a negative effect on Sicily. And so Professor Cipolla will talk to us today about this book and about some of the information that he shares. Great, wonderful. Well, we're recording as we speak, so you might as well just keep on going because it's quite interesting. But this book, this is The Struggle for Sicilian Independence.
Right.
And it's written by Giuseppe Sciano, but you edited and translated it. And let me tell you, this must have been one heck of a work to translate and put together because there's so much details here about the Risorgimento.
Well, I can tell you that it was a very long project. It was a very long project, which actually began many, many years ago, at least 20 years ago. 20 years ago, when Giuseppe, because Giuseppe was one of the people who was invited at the meetings in Palermo where we got there. So he was there all the time, at all times, and then I would ask him to speak and tell us what he was doing. So I have known him. I knew him because he passed away, as you learned. He passed away last year.
Was he a political activist? What was his, or was he a representative, or what was his situation?
He was basically a politician, but more an intellectual who loved Sicily and Sicilian language. And he was He was the founder of something called Fronte Nazionale Siciliano, which is like a continuation of the Sicilian independentist movement. Because Sicily wanted to be independent. It's been always wanting to be independent. And there were people who actually formed a party claiming that they wanted to become independent from Italy. And they were involved in political movement. They had even had a little army which fought during war. I don't know if you ever heard the name of Finocchiaro Aprile or Antonio Canepa. These were heroes who worked for Sicilian independence, wanting to make not only an independent nation of Sicily, but at one point they wanted to become one of the states of the United States.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. When was that? That was when
it didn't happen. So Giuseppe was an intellectual who always worked for that. He even ran for the region, the presidency of the region of Sicily. He didn't make it, unfortunately, but he got a lot of votes.
Right.
And so he was always involved in digging into history to find out exactly what happened. And his project was to write a history from the point of view of Sicilians, from the Sicilianist point of view. And it was supposed to be starting from Garibaldis Invasion in 1860 and continue to this day, until he died, basically, to 19 after and until the modern era. And he sent me all of the stuff that he had written, and I had accumulated about 800 pages of translation of the work. It would have been a massive enterprise.
Yeah.
But there was a problem with the way he was addressing history, because Americans don't know much about what actually happened in Italy. They don't even know that Sicily was not part of Italy until 1861, until Garibaldi conquered it, and that Sicily was always somewhat not independent, but it at one point it was its own kingdom during the Norman era. Then it became Aragonese. Then it became Spanish. Then it became a viceroy, a royal land governed by Spanish viceroys.
Right.
For a long time, but all the time, Sicilians always wanted to be free, independent. And at one point, during the kingdom of Roger II, Roger II, the Norman, Sicily was its own kingdom, and it was basically the most important kingdom that ruled the southern part of the Mediterranean, from Sicily, Malta, northern Africa, as far as Corfu, and other things. People had to pay. The people, if they crossed the Strait of Messina, the Canal of Sicily, which is the sea between Sicily and northern Africa, they had to pay homage and duty to Roger II.
Yeah.
Any ship that was found crossing the Canal of Sicily, if they were intercepted by the navy of Roger II, they had to pay a duty.
What year was this? What year? What's the time frame?
From the 12th century to perhaps the 14th century.
I see. Right.
So Giuseppe was as I said, an intellectual who always fought to preserve not only the history, the correct version of the history, but also to preserve the Sicilian identity.
Well, he opens the book when it's like the Kingdom of Two Sicilys, right? You have it. You can explain that for us a little bit. That right before the Risorgimento was the Kingdom of Two Sicilys that were there, and what did that make up? What did that consist of?
Well, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies didn't exist basically until 1814, when it was. Well, let's just say you have to go back to the time of the. Are we recording right now, or is this? Are we on? Oh, so it goes back to the problems of the French and Sicilian. The French, as you know, became the lords of Sicily for a little while, until Sicily. The Sicilians revolted against them and drove them out of Sicily in 1283, starting a war against French, because they were taxing them too much, because they were whatever.
Yeah, sure.
The whole thing started from there, and so basically there was a war that lasted 100 years. 100 years, and until they actually signed an agreement where the two part of the kingdom, which included all of southern Italy. All southern Italy was originally part of the Kingdom of Sicily,
That includes
starting from
Naples, and includes
Naples,
Calabria.
Molise, all the way down. If you go, the papal state separated, was in the middle of Italy, but everything south of the papal state belonged to the Kingdom of Sicily. Puglia, Calabria, Basilicata, Naples, Campania, all of it was part of the Sicilian kingdom at
That's
one
almost
point.
like half of Italy, pretty much. Almost like half of Italy
Well,
today.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, if you look at a map of that, you will see that it not only is the biggest land portion of Italy before it became part of Italy, but it is the largest in terms of population and terrain.
Yeah.
Land. So at one point, when they made a peace between the French and the Sicilians, they had to devise two lands. So they said that the Anjou king was the king of Sicily, but it only the part of Naples. And in Sicily, the Aragonese and the people who took over Sicily were part of the kingdom of Trinacria, which is another word for Sicily.
Yeah.
Trinacria. So there were two kingdoms, Trinacria and Sicily. But then it went on for many centuries until 1814, when they decided to make one state out of the two of them, and so they call them the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which was the capital of Naples. Naples became the capital, and Sicily was always governed by, let's say, by Naples, in effect. But Sicilians always wanted to become part of an independent nation, and didn't often revolted against the new settlement. They wanted to become a nation of its own, independent, and it never happened. It never
Yeah.
happened. It never
Well, it
happened.
makes sense since they're there. I mean, it's an island, so it does kind of make sense because they're separate from Italy. So you would think that would make an ideal country or whatever. Yeah.
Well, Malta, which belonged to Sicily at one point, has become an independent nation
Right. Okay. Good
now.
point. Yeah.
But it originally was part of Sicily.
Right.
In fact, it was given to the knights to govern by Roger II, and they had to pay duty to Sicily because they were all pay homage to him. And then you remember the story of the Maltese Falcon?
Sure. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. That was with Humphrey
So they
Bogart. Right.
paid,
Okay. Right.
the homage was every year the knights of
Malta.
Malta had to give a gift to the king of Sicily, and the gift was a Maltese Falcon.
Maltese Falcon. Right. Mm.
So basically, the book, I started to tell you about the book, something about Giuseppe, because Giuseppe, as I said, was an intellectual who always wrote his history having in mind the people who were antagonistic to it. In other words, his was a history that he was addressing all of his remarks to the local historians, or the historians who chronicled the history of the island from the point of view of the victors. So basically, when he was addressing people, he would use sarcasm, he would use irony, and when I translated the work, that kind of approach would not work for Americans because they had no idea. They have no idea to whom he was talking, who were his interlocutors.
Right.
So I have to tone down that kind of sarcasm and irony because it lacked the context. Americans don't know much about what the history of Sicily. So I did that. and which took a very long time. So and also I decided that somehow the book would have been too massive and too long. It's already 352
Yeah,
pages.
yeah, right here. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. It's quite the size. Yeah.
it's quite a size. So, and it took a very long time. Uh, I do want to say something about how the whole thing started. Uh, as a teacher, as a professor of Italian, one of the things that I taught at the University of St. John's University, was a course on translation, on the art and skills of translation. And again, I would like to mention that in one of my classes of the translation, I began to use part of the narrative that Giuseppe was sending me as part of the work of my students. So that my students, I would give one chapter to one student, one other to another student, and collected about 20 different chapters. Uh, Naturally, students of Italian, I had to practically redo all of them again. Because students who are learning Italian at the university level don't have the necessary skills for translating a work of this size. But I was grateful for their work, and it ended up I spent a lot of time correcting, rewriting, and then finally had to rewrite most of it uh, from different perspectives. And I had to decide whether to go as far as he did in terms of the span of time that it covered.
Mm.
But I decided that it would have been too long and too much of too much work.
Yeah,
So
because this book
I cut
stops.
it.
This book
I
stops.
cut
I
it
think right
down.
at the end of the Risorgimento, doesn't it? Yeah.
The book starts from Garibaldi's invasion in 1860, and then to the revolt of the Sette Mezzo, which ended in 1866. So it's basically 7 years of span time, but it's full of details. I don't think there are any books on history of Sicily that are as detailed as Giuseppe. I have in front of me a book by Jasper Ridley on Garibaldi, and I can show it to you. Jasper Ridley on Garibaldi is an enormous book uh, where Giuseppe spends 50 pages on one particular item, he spends maybe about 3-4 lines. So the thing that Giuseppe does is very meticulous research about what actually happened uh, during Garibaldi's invasion. How Garibaldi was able to win a war fighting with 1,000 volunteers all wearing red butcher shirts, red shirts that were actually used by the butchers. And 1,000, but with 1,000 volunteers, they managed to have the upper hand against an army of 24,000 soldiers who were well trained, well armed, and eager to fight. And the explanation for that, Jasper Ridley says it was basically almost inexplicable that such a thing occurred. And what we can say is that Garibaldi was extremely lucky. Extremely lucky. How can you defeat and not defeat? They never defeated the army per se, but whenever they had a fight, whenever they had a clash between the two forces, Garibaldi was nearly decimated, except for the last moment when the high command of the Sicilian and the Neapolitan army decided to withdraw snatching, snatching. What is one of my
Snatching victory from the jaws of defeat or
victory
whatever.
from
Well,
jaws
yeah,
of
I think right. Yeah,
victory. In other words,
right. Yeah.
if I can give you some of the examples, for example, the Battle of Calatafimi, which is which was the first actually encounter between Garibaldi's volunteers and the Sicilian, the Neapolitan army. And what happened is, for example, Jasper Ridley says that the Garibaldian army was 3-1 against the Neapolitans. In other words, he said that the Neapolitan army had at its disposal 3,000 soldiers, and they were there against the 1,000 soldiers of Garibaldi. But in reality, what actually happened is that the commander of the Neapolitan army sent a battalion of those 3,000 soldiers into the area where the Garibaldians were, only to reconnoiter, only to look around and see what things were. So the battle was fought between 600 army of the Neapolitan army and 1,200 of Garibaldi. So it was the other way around. The Garibaldians outnumbered the Neapolitans, not the other way around.
Yeah.
Because the 3,000 soldiers were kept at bay 5 miles away and never fought, never fired a rifle at all. And so the commander of the battalion, when he saw the Garibaldini, he saw that they were basically all volunteers who had no experience in fighting a battle, and decided on his own, because he was given the orders. His orders were to simply reconnoiter, just look around, see what's going on. But he decided on the spot that to run against his order to actually engage in a battle against the Garibaldini. And at one point, they almost defeated them.
Mm-hmm.
And they were running out of ammunition, and they sent for reinforcement. They asked the General forgot his name, Letizia. Anyway, one of the generals commanding the 3,000 troops to send reinforcement. And if the reinforcement had arrived, they would have literally destroyed the whole affair. They would have conquered, and Garibaldi would have been decimated. Garibaldi lost the battle, not lost the battle, lost the flag. The Sicilians or the Neapolitans were able to capture the flag, and but they were given the order to withdraw. They were given the order to withdraw inexplicably, as Jasper Ridley says, was part of the luck of Garibaldi.
Right.
He was lucky on many different instances.
Yes.
Because, as I said, whenever he was in trouble, something like that happened. The high command snatched victory out of defeat.
Right.
By countermanding the orders, by ordering a retreat. And so the history that we learn in school in Italy probably is more of a geography, the idea.
Idealistic, yeah. Yeah, exactly, right. Why did the high command give this order to the Neapolitan forces? Why did they tell them to withdraw?
Well, it's a very good question. Why did they do that? Sciano suggests treason, suggests betrayals, suggests payola. At one point, for example, you have to understand how this whole thing happened. Giuseppe uh, mentioned that uh, Garibaldi would not have had a chance if he was not helped by the British Secret Service, by the British government, by the Piedmont Sardinian king Victor Emmanuel, who pretended they didn't know nothing. They knew nothing about this invasion, when in fact they knew everything. Everybody knew what was happening. So they were helped by the mafia. People talk about the Picciotti, who who did not actually fight that much, but they were waiting to see how the whole thing would be resolved, or whether who was going to win, and at that point they decided to actually go into it. And in the Battle of Calatafimi, for example, after the general decided to withdraw, they had to go back to Palermo. They said they had to go back to Palermo, and it became kind of a not a route, but they were returning to Palermo, and they were passing through. They were passing through Partinico, one of the towns, as they were going back to Palermo, and there were a few stragglers, probably soldiers who got lost or were tired, and they were straggling. They were coming afterwards. So as they went through Partinico, uh, the Picciotti, which is another word, the young men. Who are these? The young men. These are young mafia men. They were allegiant to some of the barons. Barons, and they responded. They took orders directly from them, from the baron. So in order to show that they were contributing something, that they were active fighters. They waited. They as the stragglers went through Partinico, the mafia Picciotti were inside some of the houses, and they shot 7 of them. They shot 7 of them, and the whole story was told in a different manner by Garibaldi himself and by the people who accompanied him, whose history, who wrote notes about that. Cesare Abba, for example, was one of the young guys who kept a diary of what was happening. And Sciano takes issue with their rendition of what actually happened. Sciano says that Garibaldi and Abba says that it was the people of Partinico who were actually the people who killed those soldiers, and they later burned them and displayed them in the streets. And after that, they were young girls dancing around it as if they were. Which and Sciano says that was never possible. That would never happen in Sicily, especially in Partinico, which is a large town, and people. If In other words, he takes issue with the interpretation of what actually happened. Those soldiers were killed by the mafia. They were killed by the Picciotti, and they were burned after they were dead in order for them not to decompose. They actually burned them, burned them so that the bodies would not decompose completely until to show Garibaldi, who was coming through Partinico afterwards, was able to see the contribution of the Picciotti to the enterprise. So it was a way of showing that they were good fighters, but they weren't good fighters because, first of all, in the Battle of Calatafimi, they just stood on the high ground and they did not participate in the war. They did not fire their rifles. They were just there watching to see who was going to win. But in this case, they actually started. They murdered those 7 soldiers. They burned them and they left them there on the street to see, so that Garibaldi, when Garibaldi was passing through with his army, he would see them, and he did see them, and of course, the whole thing was interpreted differently. That's one case, but I mean, there's so many different. The stories that Giuseppe tells are in contrast with what the official chronicles, or not the semi-official. I mean, there was no official chronicle, but there were people like Cesare Alba and another lieutenant of Garibaldi named Bandi, who actually witnessed some of the stuff and wrote about it. But from their point of view, and Giuseppe points out that that's not what happened.
Right. Well, he brought up too the fact that he said that, but you brought up the mafia. He said that the mafia wasn't what it is today. It became that after the Risorgimento.
Afterwards, yes, because at one point, having contributed to the war effort by Garibaldi, eventually they all got pensions for having fought. They're in perpetuity. In other words,
right.
They got they were reimbursed, and they became a very powerful organization, which well, they were obviously important, but they were given free rein during the campaign.
Right, they were rewarded for what they did. Yeah,
in different towns, when the law and order of the governing by the Neapolitans and the Sicilians fell through, obviously there was nobody had anything to do other than they gave free rein to the mafia to run things. And so they committed all kinds of atrocities against the Sicilian population. Well, so that's basically the story of Sicily. But the whole idea of Giuseppe is that the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies was the largest state in Italy in 1860. And the Kingdom of Sardinia and Piedmont decided to help, even though it kept a distance. Nobody was supposed to know anything, but they knew. Everybody knew what was happening. Everybody knew what was happening. The British knew exactly what was happening. They had spies all over the place. And they engaged mercenaries from Hungary to come and fight in Sicily. And they had the British Navy right there. They had the British Navy in Marsala, and the Neapolitan ships that intercepted Garibaldi couldn't fire on them for fear of actually starting hitting the British. And they were the Admiral Mundy, who was the highest ranking admiral of the British Navy at the time, was anchored in Palermo on his ship called the Hannibal, and he was in charge basically. So he was doing all kinds of things, even though he always pretended that he was neutral. There was one fellow who said that this one fellow, I don't have his name, but I'm sure if you read the book, you know it. He said that the inexplicable victory against the Neapolitan was done through British banknotes. Jasper Radley says, "Oh, if that was true, Lord Palmerston and the British government didn't know anything about it. Now, if they knew something about it, would they have told us?"
Yeah. What was the reason why Italy? What was the reason why England and the British Empire? Why would they want a unified Italy versus to what was going on beforehand?
Well, basically because they wanted to counter the importance of the French. The French were a world power with Napoleon before them, but Napoleon III, who was the emperor at the time, so they had their hands in Italy. They were the helpers of the papacy, for example. They were the ones who wanted the status quo because they wanted to become well, they wanted to control the Mediterranean themselves, and the British wanted to control the Mediterranean also. So they felt that by creating a unified country of Italy, because Italy at that time was a conglomerate of different states. Piedmont, they were fighting a war of independence, basically. Venice was still part of the Austrian Empire, Modena, and some other things. The Grand Duchy of Tuscany, for example, was separate. And there was the Papal State. The Papal States were right in the middle of it, preventing any kind of joint of unification of Italy because they had to deal with that. At one point, King Victor Emmanuel's approached King Francis II, who was the new king of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, and proposed to him, "Why don't we divide Italy amongst ourselves and leave the Papal State? We just give him Rome, and we will split it, the two of us." But Francis II refused the whole thing because he was a Catholic, and he didn't want to do that to the Pope. So it was an important thing for the British government to actually have its influence in the Mediterranean. You know, the British were in Sicily for a long time also.
Yeah.
They gave Sicily their own constitution in 1812. In 1812, they gave their constitution to Sicily. After that, of course, the Bourbons took over, but they had, at one point, they wanted to make Sicily part of England.
Was the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, was that still under the domain of Spain, or what was that?
No, the Bourbons. They were independent. Well, the Bourbons were originally Spanish. So the Bourbons were the kings of Sicily, the kingdom of the Two Sicilies. So the Bourbon family were the reigning monarchs, but they're not. They were originally Spanish, but they had no. They did not depend from Spain. They were not part of Spain. So they were an independent kingdom. And it was the largest kingdom of Italy at the time.
And the author shows basically what it was like before the Risorgimento, and then what happened after. So it really was kind of a thriving kingdom, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. But then after the Risorgimento, you began to see this decline, and that's why so many people left.
Well, yes. Well, the whole idea is we always have been taught at school that the people of Sicily, the people of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, were oppressed. They were living in a very oppressed situation. They were taxed beyond their means. They were backgrade. They were like when Garibaldi, Bixio, who was the second in command of Garibaldi, would call them Bedouins, call Sicilians Bedouins. And the whole idea that Sicily and the southern part of Italy were a backward country that were exploited by the king, by their king, but what happened is that after they became Italians, the taxes imposed on Sicilians were 3 times larger
Yeah.
than they were before,
Right.
because Sicily, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, was a region which their economy was based on gold, on the idea of a gold-backed currency. They had gold in their banks, and they had more gold than all of the other states of Italy combined, all of them. Something like 444 million gold reserves against maybe uh, less than that if you put them all together from all the different states of Italy. Not only that, they didn't have any debt, basically. They had no debt. The debt of Sicily was maybe, of the Kingdom of Sicily, maybe 5 million lire at the time, when the Kingdom of Piedmont and Sardinia had something like a debt of 300,000 or 300 million lire.
Yeah.
5 million against that. So basically, when Garibaldi was able to take command of Palermo, one of the first things he did was to go to the Bank of Sicily. And what did he do? He took the money, whatever deposits were there in gold, he
The
took it.
spoils. Yeah. The spoils of everything. Right.
Yes, and with that money, they financed the rest of the campaign. So the money from Sicily basically paid the volunteers back wages for fighting against Sicily.
I'm assuming they must have.
Ironic.
He must have taken all. Did he take all the gold? Though I'm assuming he must have taken all the gold and brought it
Yes.
back to Turin or Rome or whatever it was that he wanted
Yeah,
to bring.
no, in Turin.
Yeah.
Well, Rome was not conquered yet.
Right.
Rome became part of Italy in 1870. After
Right.
The first capital of of the new kingdom was Turin at the beginning. Then it became Florence, and only after papal states were defeated, in a sense, that they decided to use Rome as a capital.
Right. Right. Right.
So,
Well, yeah. It's
the whole idea of taxation, for example, I told you that Sicily, when Sicily became part of Italy, the taxes on the Sicilian people were increased because Piedmont and the new Italian state had made so many debts, had so many debts that they had to increase the income from taxation, so that they imposed larger taxes on Sicily. They imposed also the whole idea of people joining the army. It was required. They were Sicilians are not military people generally. They didn't have to serve in the army if they didn't want to. But with the new government, they had to.
yeah.
And that created the problem of bandits, because most people in Sicily, most young people in Sicily did not want to fight and did not want to become soldiers in the new Italian government. And so they deserted, or they went into the hills.
Yeah.
And they, of course, that created a problem because they were considered bandits. They
Mm,
weren't bandits. They
mm.
were people who didn't want to fight and become a soldier. When they were farmers who had, if they did not work on the farm, their family would starve.
Mm.
So it
Mm.
was an economic issue, not a desire not to serve the new country.
What you travel to Sicily a lot, of course, and what is the feeling there today among Sicilians regarding the unification of Italy? Do they want? Do you feel that a lot of Sicilians want to break away, or do you think that sentiment is no longer really there?
Oh, I think by now the Sicilians were always part of Italy. were always part of Italy. Sicily was the first province of Rome. I don't know if you
Right.
know that.
Right.
When Rome became the first province, the first outside of its own area, Sicily was the first province. So Sicily has always been part of Italy in the sense geographically you can't separate it from Italy. Uh, but they have always, because they are an island, they have always had the feeling that their history is different.
Yeah.
They have a different history from all the other parts of Italy. They have a different history, and they have gone through 18, 19 different dominations by different people, always remaining Sicilians.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah.
And they have managed to remain Sicilians in spite of all the different dominations of people who have come.
Well, that's really important. That's an important place to end it, I think, because it's just I want to tell everybody again about this book, the struggle for Sicilian independence, and this is the person how he looks like. I'll put a picture of him also.
That's right. Giuseppe Sciano,
Giuseppe
dear
Sciano,
friend,
and he
dear
passed away.
friend
But
who
he
passed
passed away
away.
what, 2 years ago, I guess, or
2 years ago. 2 years
yeah.
ago, when I didn't see him at the usual meetings, when we go with the tour, when I did not see him in 2 years ago, after we resumed doing the tours after the pandemic, when I didn't see him, I was kind of shocked, and I didn't know why until one of our members, one of the people, I said, "Where is Giuseppe?"
Mm.
And he told me Giuseppe passed away 3 days before our meeting.
Oh, that's too bad.
Had passed away 3 days before our meeting. And so I wrote a memorial for him. And the book, as you can see, is dedicated to him.
Well, very good. There's a lot of information there, folks, and it's a really, if you're interested in Sicilian history, this really is the book to look at because it gives you a whole different perspective of the Risorgimento and how Sicily is related to it all. So it's really quite the book, I think. Very important. I was educated by it all, just understanding about how it is today, how we've gotten here to this situation now. Based upon what happened then. Yeah,
An
it's a very
important
good,
book.
excellent
They
book.
can send the book is available by sending the amount is $24 plus $4.50 for shipping if they send it to post office to Legas, Legas, post office box 149, Mineola, New York 11501.
And I'll have links to it as well that people can order it online also if they want to. And
they're all online, but they will get better treatment if they order
right.
directly from me because Amazon has to order it from me.
All right.
They
There you
order
go.
from me, I send it to them, and then they
There you
send
go.
it out.
Right. The middleman. They
Faster.
get to avoid the middleman. Right. That's good. Great. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Professor, for being here with me today. And I look forward to more work coming your way. You're always busy and you're always coming up with wonderful things.
Thank you for having me, and viva la Sicilia.
There you go. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye.